Welcome to Celtic Medicine Stories, a podcast where we explore stories from the old Celtic lands, with the understanding that they carry medicine for us. I'm your host, Catherine Parker, and I offer these stories in the spirit of the oral storytelling tradition of the British Isles. That is, they are free and they're open to everyone, always. Although these stories often have come from another time and have evolved through time with the oral storytelling tradition, they are here still for a reason. If you're curious about going deeper with the story, with the images, symbols, characters, landscapes, sounds, whatever it is that's speaking to you from this particular story, then there are some free resources below which will help guide you in that process. This story captured my heart when I first heard it. It comes from the Irish traveller tradition and is recorded in a beautiful book called Why the Moon Travels by Oein BeBhairduin. These tales stand out to me as distinct from most other Celtic tales that I've come across. They explain the origins of things in a way that I'm used to coming across in Native American stories, but not in Celtic ones. They're curious and very beautiful. This story in particular carries a worldwide theme of women who work to spin and weave, in addition to plant lore and magical instruction, all in a short little folktale. I offer this as an honouring to all of those who work for the benefit of others and the ancestors who got us here. And I highly recommend Owen's book. There's a link in the notes to purchase a copy. Enjoy. So as you listen to this story, as with all these Celtic medicine stories, let yourself float. You don't need to pay attention in the way maybe you were asked to do in school. You don't need to try and follow the plot line or the dialogue or anything in particular. In fact, the medicine lies in what you find yourself attending to. So when you let yourself go into that receptive, floaty state and you find your mind wanting to savor an image or a sound or a word, and you find yourself more engaged with that than whatever it is that I'm saying, then notice that. You don't need to analyze it or try and figure it out in that moment, but just notice it, that called your attention, because that's where the medicine lies. Wherever this story interacts with your story is what you're looking for. And I believe this is part of why these stories have been around for so long, is because they each interact with us in some special way. And so as you listen, just let yourself absorb it and notice which parts stick out to you. If you walk quietly down a country lane in the late afternoon as the sun is sending its golden rays across the landscape, you might be lucky enough to see the old women who gather. You will see them with these tightly woven willow baskets on their backs, gathering different specific plants. They look specifically for St. John's wort. They look for beetroots, and they look for the fallen bark of the crabapple tree. They whistle it away into their baskets. And as they go around the land, they also look for the flax that grows along the roadsides, and they look for the wool from the sheep that got snagged in the brambles and the hawthorn trees, and they gather that up and they put it in their basket. And these women are clad all in black, except for the edges of their skirt, which are lined with bands of white and yellow and red. And some of them have different colors, different strands, each for one of their children, whether alive still or departed. And around their waists are often tied pockets where they keep their special things, and these pockets are decorated with beads and buttons and medals and all sorts of shiny other colors. They have long grey hair, most of them, braided into a plait that hangs down their backs. Now, as the sun starts to set, you'll notice that they head towards their molly. That's their little shelter where they live. And in the very center of that molly is a fire that's always well stoked. And on top of that fire is an cast iron black pot. And in that pot, they put the bark and the plants and the roots, and they stir it well, for this is their dyeing pot. And it turns the flax and the wool a bright, beautiful red. and the iron from the pot adds to the colour, and it bubbles away all night. And they stir and they spin the wool and they start to weave. Now as they weave and they boil and they stir and they spin, they sing these beautiful songs that bubble up from their hearts. And in those songs is their clear intention and their prayers and their blessings for every single child that is born. Because they are weaving cords that will be tied around the wrists of those young ones and protect them through life. And it is said that if you happen to wander past the Molly at night, you'll see a golden glow as their hearts and songs fill the air with these blessings. They gather at dusk, they work at night, and by the time the dawn arrives, they settle down into their beds for some rest. And this was the way that it was for a very, very long time. Now, as the people flourished and all the children did well and they thrived and they grew up and they had more children, then there became so many children that it was hard for them, these women, to keep up with all the gathering that was needed and all the dyeing and the boiling and the stirring and the spinning and the weaving and the praying to make the cords for all the children. So they decided together that they would keep making cords, but they would tie them together to make one big cord that went round the entire world, so everybody would be contained in their blessings. And so they worked and they worked and they worked. They gathered and they stoked the fire and they boiled the dye pot and they stirred it and they spun the yarn and they wove it and they worked and worked and worked, and often they forgot to sleep or they forgot to eat. And as time went on, their fingers that used to be kissed a little gentle pink color from the dye started to become brown from the ashes of the fire, or started to become black from handling the pot so much. And they worked and they worked, these old women who gathered, they worked and they worked day and night and at dusk and dawn, it didn't matter. They just kept working. And often it got so hot in the molly from the furious bubbling of the pot that the sweat from their brows started to wash away the dye, and the yarn and the red disappeared, and the yarn turned into this silken grey gossamer, still strong in the middle. And as they worked and they worked and they worked, they grew very, very bony. Their fingers were long from all the spinning and the weaving, and their bodies got smaller. They started to shrink. And they worked and they worked and they worked and worked. And some women worked so hard that they worked away one or two fingers. Other women kept the baskets on their backs the whole time, from gathering to boiling to spinning to weaving, more gathering. The baskets stayed on their back and their little pockets stayed wrapped around them. And as they worked, they shrunk and they shrunk and they shrunk from not eating and not sleeping. But their hearts remained warm, and the task remained their focus. And as they shrunk and their fingers got longer and bonier, they grew less of this world and more of another, until they became what seemed to be just a bundling of fingers that was spinning and weaving and gathering, with these baskets on their back and these shadings and colours that once were their skirts and once were their pockets covered their bodies. And these old women who gathered became the first spiders. And it is said that now they continue to spin and weave their blessings across the entire world. So when you go out in the morning and you see one of their webs glistening in the morning sun, give thanks for this blessing and the lives of those that offer their work and blessing for all of us. Thank you for listening to this episode of Celtic Medicine Stories. If you want to go deeper, check out my Working with Archetypes free email course. There's a link somewhere in these notes. You'll find it. And feel free to visit on my website, ancestralconnections.earth. I'd love to hear from you. Go well.